This is the YOB ConvoCast, one-on-one conversations with your other brother's authors, community members, supporters, and friends.
When I'm with you, I feel like I'm already home. When I'm with you, I'm right where I belong. I'm already home.
What's up, friends, and welcome back to the YOB ConvoCast conversations with our apparently SoCal community, because that's just where we're hunkering down lately. My name's Tom. I'm the co-founder, editor of Your Other Brothers. We're a community navigating faith, homosexuality, and masculinity together. And we are chugging right ahead with our at-home series exploring how our living situations and life stages affect our faith, sexuality, and masculinity. And we have another layer to dissect here today. And I figured since we were already in SoCal, we would just hang out there for a little bit longer and connect with the person that was teased and aforementioned in our previous episode with Andrew. So if you haven't listened to the episode with Andrew, go back. Please go back and listen to it. He's been on this podcast once before. We talked about body image many months ago, and that was a really great conversation. I'm glad he is back. He's sort of the originator of this whole series, actually. So glad to have back the most commonly occurring name in our community, but it's Daniel. What's up, Daniel?
Nothing much, Tom. Glad to be here and honored to be titled the originator of this series. That's crazy.
The originator. It's you. Yeah. It's fascinating. Like, our community is all over the map, all kinds of living situations all over the map. And it's been really illuminating to learn more about those living situations. And honestly, when I saw the story, I was like, I really would love to include you in this. It's not just because you're the originator. It's because you have a fascinating experience, one that I partook in. I'm pretty sure, gosh, this is a problem I have, is like, I completely forget what I've shared on the podcast and what I've just shared on Zoom calls, what I've shared with people in real life. Like, it all runs together for me. So I have no doubt that there are people listening who only know me from the podcast. And so they'll be like, yeah, of course you talked about that time you painted in Daniel's living room with with his straight roommates. And I think 10 queer people. I'm pretty sure like I've shared that before. Maybe I haven't, I don't know, but we teased it on the last episode. And so we're definitely going to re-explore that story among many others here today. So I'm excited to do that with you.
Looking forward to it myself. And it was such a fun time having you in our space, or our home, if you will.
I always love to bless people's homes whenever I can. Yeah, it's always a blessing. It really is to meet our community members, to meet moms and dads of our community members, roommates, et cetera, people they go to church with, pastors. Like, I love just getting little glimpses of our community's worlds. So, yeah, hopefully it doesn't take too long before I wander my way back to sunny SoCal. I assume the weather is still divine out there. Can you give us a weather update?
Oh, it's divine. Yeah, it's we turned on the AC today because it was pushing mid to high 80s before 10 a.m. and we're thinking we don't have to try to sweat it out today. So we're going to pay a little bit of that good California gas and electric bill this month to have some cool air in our house. But it is lovely. It's sunny and dry and a perfect day to go to the beach, as always.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm starting to tap into my own AC budget here on the other side of the country with the North Carolina humid summers that we get here on the western side of the state. So try not to turn it on too many days per summer, but giving myself at least a day or two to splurge on that here right now. Remind everybody, in case they missed your previous episode, in case they're new to YOB, in case they're lurking, we love our lurkers. Tell us a little bit about yourself. There's probably maybe even an update or two since the last time you were on the podcast a few months ago.
Yeah. My name is Daniel. I'm a YOBer in SoCal, specifically San Diego area. West Coast, best coast. We're still rooting for Tom to move to California after last podcast. I have lived out here for the last 6 years now. 5 years. Yeah, 2019. I originally came out here for a job, to be a teacher. I've stayed here doing that for the last couple of years, but as of recently, that is not what I'm doing next year. I'm taking what I'm calling a year of Jubilee. For those of you who love the Days of Elijah song, you can spin around and poke the ceiling as you do
Whoa.
that. Yeah, throwback. So currently I don't have a future job lined up. I do a summer sort of side gig with some old coworkers, and I paint houses and house sit and kind of do odd jobs here and there. So I'm kind of doing that for right now, and enjoying my time living in sunny San Diego.
San Diego. West Coast, yeah. I apparently there is this movement to move me back to SoCal, and so we will see. We will see if the Lord moves in my heart. I don't know. I don't know if He will or not, but we shall see.
Anything is possible if you just believe.
That's right. Absolutely. Prince of Egypt, right? Is that a Prince of Egypt reference?
Sure. I was quoting Cinderella's story with Hilary Duff, but to each their own.
It's like the Venn diagram of faith, sexuality, and masculinity. It's all there. It's all there in that line.
Yeah,
very nice.
Exactly.
Do you have a similar story to Andrew? Did you just like not live in SoCal and were like, I want to go where the people are? Like, what was the how did you get to SoCal? You said there was a job. Were you looking elsewhere, or did you fixate on SoCal?
That's kind of a longer story. I grew up all over. My dad was military.
Okay,
and
that's
so
right.
all my 5 siblings were kind of born in different states. So I've lived in like 6 different states, and I think 9 different quotation physical homes. And maybe 1 or 2 of those I don't remember per se. But so I've been all over. When I got to college, it was my school was affiliated with like a very niche denominational religious group, and they just happened to kind of hand out their graduates information to all the niche religious communities that had high schools around the area and around the globe in the US. And one of them reached out, and it reached out early enough, and they had like all the things I was hoping to find in a job. And I knew someone from that town and that space, and I was like, oh, California, I guess that's an option. I have a grandma and some aunts who live further up north, like 8 hours away. So California was not like out of the window. I also had an older sister that moved across the Pacific Ocean. So there was precedence in our family that when you graduate, you can go anywhere you want. And California just happened to be where I landed.
Wow. Yeah, I remember you talking about that either on a podcast or in conversation. It all bleeds together for me. I don't know. My sense of perspective is warped. I have no idea where I knew that. But that is it. Let's just jump in right there real quick. So growing up, was that just normal for you that you would move to a different state like every year or every other year? Was that not normal? Was it comfortable but not ideal? Was it something you looked forward to? Some combination of all of those? Because I've always wondered about that with military families or families. Yeah. I had one move as a teenager, which was horrific enough. And so in my mind, if that were me, that would be a nightmare. But maybe there's a sense of like, because I could also see it potentially from the other side that, oh, you get to have a clean slate. Or if you love life experience, you get to experience life over here now and meet these people. Or if you love to just meet people, then that could be a glass half full thing. But what was that like for you growing up?
Sure. Yeah. So I moved twice before the age of 6. So like those moves, I don't really remember. I was born in Virginia. Moved to Maryland, and I distinctly remember my first memory. For those who care to know, I think it's always a fun fact, like your earliest memory. I remember my 3rd birthday because it happened to have occurred on the train ride from our house in Maryland to the west when we moved to Michigan.
Wow.
And so I recall my 3rd birthday on the train ride, and so my first memories were in a train without a home, if you will. It was with family. And I grew up with like Michigan kind of being the idealized sort of home or space that was like, this is what I know. My older siblings, I have 3 older siblings. They probably would more attune to that description you're talking about, like moving all the time. Like, do you really hold on to that? They would have moved. Well, my oldest sister would have moved like 5 times by the time she was 10, and she would have remembered most of them. And then my older brothers would have moved 4 and then 3 respectively. And so I think we spent the longest time in Michigan, and that's in that area near Wisconsin, Upper Peninsula, Michigan is where my 2 younger sisters were born. So then we just ended up, I feel like, maybe it's my naivety, but I feel like Michigan became our like sort of idealized childhood home. We didn't have a kid that had hit teenager years yet. Our youngest sister was like just turning 3. Like Michigan was kind of where we had settled, it seemed like. And it was interesting. When I think about like that idea of home, we did have a physical home there we stayed in for the longest amount of time. But I don't really so much remember the physical home as like my idealized home as much as it was like the state of being. So like me and my siblings, we just did everything together. We were all homeschooled. So we would do our obligations in the morning. We would all hop on our bikes and go to a nearby park or to the local library or to the local playground. We'd go climb rocks and trees and play with sprinklers or in the snow or whatever it was. And we kind of just did that sans parents, actually, because our dad was working and our mom was probably exhausted. And so it was like this sort of free form, everything's good, everything's fine. Maybe my naivete, I didn't know of whatever conflicts there were, but like that was kind of home to me. And then when my dad retired from the military early and said, let's move to the middle of nowhere, away from organized civilization and away from any coastal port city, we moved to the middle of nowhere, Midwest, South Dakota. And I feel like that's when I was like, oh, this is no longer the home I knew before. So,
dang. Thank you for bravely confessing your homeschooling roots. We had this fun little Discord discussion after Andrew's episode about did homeschooling make us gay? And there's an astonishing number of homeschoolers in our community.
Yeah. I was only homeschooled kindergarten, first and second. So I really only dipped my toes in.
Yeah, me too.
But having siblings who spent longer, it's something, that's for sure. It does have an impact on you.
Yeah. I was only homeschooled 4th and 5th grade. 4th and 5th grade, though, is such an awkward time. Like I literally went back to my same school. So I was there in 3rd grade, was away for 2 years, went back in 6th grade. And that is such a difference to see my classmates from 3rd grade to 6th grade. Like it was so jarring, disorienting. I mean, I looked different, felt different too. So that was just probably one of the worst times I could have disappeared from society and then re-entered.
Yeah. Having taught 5th grade and 6th grade, I can tell you that 5th graders are literally still children. And then the 6th graders are just like on that verge of what is happening in the world, and
the awkward journey
their
begins.
Minds and their bodies. Like, some of them have started, some of them are like, what's still going on? I'm a child still, it's crazy.
Crazy time. Absolutely. But shout out to our homeschoolers. Also, shout out to Michigan, because for whatever reason, we have such a population of Michiganders, if that's the right noun. So shout out to all of you listening, because we have. I
would say there's something in the waters, but that sounds like
all those lakes. Yeah. Or something out there. So interesting. So then the move to South Dakota, and maybe home wasn't as idealized anymore, because I definitely resonate too with a family that did stuff together. As you live in SoCal now, let's kind of catch up to the present a little bit. So tell us in a snapshot, like, who do you live with, or what kinds of humans do you live with, and just start to talk to us about your situation there.
Yeah, I love how you just like open the bait is right there, so that I can just say, oh yes, I live with straight roommates. Have lived with straight roommates for the last like 5 years here. Always had roommates in college. Honestly, even had roommates growing up in high school and before, just because of how big our family was. So I've always lived with straight men, from the beginning of time. The 2 straight friends I live with now are people I met when I moved out here. I moved out here with a college friend, got housing with them, and then they had some friends from their high school, the high school I ended up teaching at, who eventually became roommates with myself and him at some point. One for a little bit, and then one for another little bit, and then the other person came back. And then at a certain point we said, oh, well, we're both looking for housing kind of further south and a different area. What if we just moved in together? So I've known these people only for 5 years, and they've been my roommates for the last 5 years. So at some point, give or take a little bit of time. We live in an apartment in the San Diego suburbs. We just signed a year lease. So we're kind of settling in. We're enjoying our time together.
Very interesting. And what is that like? Because I know we have a cross section of people in our community. Even on the last episode, like Andrew, it didn't sound like it was some catastrophic conflict about the feng shui of his apartment, that there was an extra ottoman in the room that needed to be removed. Like I pray for him that's the worst of it, that's the worst conflict he will have with a straight man as a roommate. Because I know there are other people in our community, and I will throw my hat in the ring that sometimes living with straight men isn't easy, because there are different emotional wavelengths. There's different intuitions at play, in addition to the sexuality, the bare bones sexuality. Like there's a lot of other extra factors at play there that it feels like it could be for some people not a good setup for harmony or for a cohesive living situation. So has that just been, have you had to learn that as you've gone? Are you just wired differently and you feel like you can get along with anybody? I think you're an Enneagram 9, right?
Yeah, I do. I do identify with Enneagram 9, and I do get along with
maybe that helps.
A lot of people, but I'm sure it does. To your point, though, there are some things I very much enjoy, like truly. And I can't say this about all straight men, but with my roommates, it seems like there's minimal expectation of what life has to be like, how we have to interact, what things need to happen. In that sense, it's like, it's very comforting to come home and, they're not expecting much of me. They're not demanding things of me. So it's really relaxed, really comfortable in that way. In that sense, like they're very comfortable. If we want to have 10 queers over and have a painting party with Pope Tom, if we say, oh yeah, our Pope is coming to town and we're going to be hosting him for a night, they're like, yeah, sure, whatever.
Break out the paints, break out the canvases.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
I've told them last minute siblings are coming and they're staying over, or random people they've never met, and they're like, yeah, cool, okay, fine, sounds good. So they're just very relaxed and comfortable with whatever it is that's going on, but they also are just like, maybe this is rude if I send this to them, hopefully they're not offended, but they kind of have like a low bar for entertainment. Like they're fine with sitting around eating pizza, playing a board game, they're fine watching a movie, they're fine going to the beach, and the stereotypes, like throwing a football and throwing a frisbee, or playing what's it called? Oh, I always forget the name. The
spike
net
ball.
Spike ball. Yeah, they love.
Where you
spike
the ball
so.
Into the net. I've never played that, and I've always wondered, how do you even, like, how come every play the ball doesn't just go 30 feet away? Like how is it so contained? Can you explain that in 30 seconds or less?
Couldn't tell you. I'm sorry. Physics is not my forte.
I see people gathering around this. It's like, it can't be more than like 5 feet around this net, and people are just like spiking it on all sides and somehow keeping it going. Like in my mind, it's like, it feels like every time you hit the ball on the net, it would just go 20 feet away every single time, but apparently not. I don't know. Someone needs to teach me spike ball.
I don't know. There you go. Or get a physicist on here to explain arcs and velocity to you.
Yes.
And I think that will answer your questions.
We need a physicist. Call to action. Physicist in our community.
Next summer series, just professionals in their field explaining something to us using gay language.
Yeah. Okay, so you said, I noticed your language. So you said they have very minimal expectations of you. Do you also have minimal expectations of them? Do you have any kind of emotional, relational expectation of these people that you share a home with?
So that's part of the fun story that Andrew may have mentioned.
Okay, because I didn't know how overt to say, tell me the pots and pans story. But
yeah,
because
that's the pots and pans story right there.
So I've had to actually mention this a few times. If you guys turn off the episode when the music starts playing and we say goodbye, sometimes you might miss something really important at the end of the episode. So it's not every episode, but more often now, I'm throwing in these little bonus segments after the credits roll, and you got to stay listening. You got to listen until the podcast literally shuts down by itself. And so in that bonus segment in our last episode with Andrew, he mentioned that there is a pots and pans story with your straight roommates that would be funny, insightful. I don't know what language he used to tell. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm intrigued because I don't know this. I don't know this story. I would like to learn the pots and pans story. So let's just let's go there. Let's go there right now.
We can jump right in. We gotta love the Tom after credit sequence, like pulling a Marvel here,
Yes.
And now everyone's gonna go back and check every podcast for like the last 6 months.
I know, you gotta
what did we miss?
Stay tuned. I'm sure this episode will have something, so stay tuned.
The real fans know. So I think one of my strengths on the Strengths Finders test is context. So I'm trying to avoid giving you every single ounce of context to this story.
It's okay.
But
Tell me
I
a
will say
rich
this
tell me
much.
a rich tale.
A rich narrative, a rich tale. So part of my journey of understanding what home and family is, has kind of been me navigating this idea of like, okay, for the longest time, I was like super happy and comfortable with my family. We just kind of did things together. Everything was fine. And then when we moved, there was like these built up things and feelings that couldn't be communicated, lest those communications lead to like, dissonance, chaos, or frustration. Who knows? So there was a level of like, you can't say the things you're feeling. So part of my part of my issues that have arisen with like friends or families or housing situations have largely come up from like uncommunicated expectations. Also, when I perceive that they have expectations for me that aren't communicated, and then I notice that there's a change in the behavior, then it just like becomes this growing problem. So I probably do have some unhealthy codependent patterns of like, I need them to need me, they need me to need them, whatever it is. So all that to say, I had a roommate who was a friend from college, and we moved out here, like pretty excited, like this is a chance for us to, reestablish ourselves in California. We were good friends in college. We did a lot of things together. And then as we moved into living with each other, we'd never lived with each other before, housing and friendship, or sharing a house, being roommates, and friendship are two very different experiences. So trying to figure out that balance of being with other people, but also trying to communicate expectations became a kind of a long process. And one of the things that just grinded my gears was, dishes in the kitchen. I think it has to do with this idea of personal space is personal space, but public space is, it's pretty public, and how you treat that space communicates how you think and treat me. So anyways, when people's bedrooms are a mess and when they've got personal style that conflicts with mine, we can make it work in living rooms or private spaces. It doesn't matter. But when you get into my kitchen and you leave it a mess, what I interpret that as, but I never told them that this was how it made me feel. I interpret that as you don't care about my capacity to feed myself and to take care of myself, and therefore you are just inflicting huge like piles of hatred and no worthiness on top of me. So I just let that build up in resentment, and would get frustrated about the state of the kitchen. At some point I did get better. One of my roommates and I started trying to express, hey, dishes can't pile up or be left out. Things have to go back to a state of kind of cleanliness, or at least like functionality. Part of the problem may have been that this was like the straw that broke the camel's back of other issues that I hadn't figured out or wasn't working through. But at a certain point, I had left on Christmas break. I was traveling for 2 weeks, and there was dishes left in the sink or on the counters before I left for Christmas break. Lo and behold, I come back 2 weeks later, and not only are the dishes that were there before I left on Christmas break still there, and they had been there for at least a week, there was now more dishes that had been left there from after Christmas break. And I confirmed with one of the roommates, like, is any of this you? Like, I sent a room text like, hey, I hope all this stuff can kind of get cleaned up before I get back. Like, nope. Like, I have specifically used these things. I've washed them. I've put them away. Those are all the other person's. And I was like, well, that's great. Okay. Well, since most of the kitchen happened to be mine, because I'm usually one of the only people that cares to use the kitchen in my straight friend circles. Most of them prefer microwavable meals or takeout. Since usually most of the cooking was done by me, a lot of the dishes, a lot of the pots, a lot of the pans, the sheets, the knives, the silverware, the plates, a lot of it was mine. And so I said, well, actions have consequences, and I'm going to train my roommates up in the way they should go. So I went through, I washed the pile of messes, and I bought some Tupperware, like some large under the bed storage that I still have. And I just filled them with all my pots and pans and all of my silverware, plates, and materials. And I just put them away under my bed. And I said, I will find a way to exist and cook in my kitchen without easy access to these things, but I will not allow my roommates to use them anymore. So
wow,
that was my grand idea of how to teach my roommates a lesson.
Actions have consequences. That is a succinct way to put it. Look at you. Okay, so how was that received? Is that still the case today, or was there a conversation that brought the pots and pans back to the kitchen? Are they still under your bed as we speak? That's the question right now.
Yeah, no. So that was 2 houses ago.
Okay.
I've lived in 3 places out here. One I lived for the first 4 years and then moved. And then we had to move again, unfortunately.
Mhm.
But the people I moved out with were not the main contributors to this dish issue. And so it was actually at that point that I decided, like, I think I need and want to move out. So the dishes went away. I communicated why they went away. And then I think either in that same text or conversations or future conversations, I also announced I was going to be leaving by a certain date. I like 5-6 months from then. So I lived with pots and pans under my bed for about 6 months. At which point also someone moved back into the area and needed housing. So I in my little 10 by 10 square foot room, there was 2 adult men and pots and pans under my bed before I ended up moving out into a new space with my own bedroom and a kitchen that could store all my pots and pans again. So
Okay.
a journey of growth and redemption to some extent.
So the order has been restored again. The kitchen order has been restored.
Yes.
That's good. Praise
The
God.
kitchen order.
Praise God.
Yes.
Oh, that's a great snapshot of communication and expectations. I think it can sound like a little example, but honestly, like kitchens and bathrooms, I mean, bathrooms for me, that's a whole other territory of sharing that space with somebody, because as grody as things can get in the kitchen, they can get exponentially grodier in the bathroom. And so just being able to communicate whose turn it is to clean this or do that, or share the responsibilities of maintaining order, like that's no small thing to have that communication locked down with somebody that you share a space with.
Yeah. Well, and I don't want to say that my roommates are the fulfillment of all those stereotypes of straight men who don't know how to cook and clean, but I mean, to some extent, there are tendencies, and I have also come to realize that it is possible I can have higher standard or expectations. And if I'm not willing to communicate and hold people to those standards of expectation, then I have to get over it or I have to do it myself.
Mm-hmm.
And to some point, I think I've found a healthier balance of like, there's definitely still some bathroom cleaning. I'm like, okay, I'm not okay with this level, but I also don't see the need to go and communicate to them and say, you need to go and deep clean the bathrooms, because I realize my preference for a deep clean bathroom is not necessarily an indication that the other person doesn't care about my well-being. So, trying to find that balance of, if I really, really care about the state of the bathroom, I can deep clean. I'll be fine with that. And I don't have to hold that against people or resent them for it. But there's also something to be said for, hey, I would love it if you washed your dishes or took care of my stuff, or, thought of me when you're cleaning up in the bathroom. It is a continual journey for sure.
Yeah. And I like how you put it too, because it is an unconscious. I'm sure the person wasn't actively thinking, how can I harm Daniel? But it is an unconscious like byproduct of what he did by not taking care of your things. It's like, oh, it's clearly not helping you. It's clearly not something that's bettering your life. And so that really is an interesting snapshot. With your current roommates now, like, so do you have meetings? Do you have like, how do you communicate expectations? Are you familiar enough with them at this point that you guys just know what everyone expects of each other? Do you need to check in at some regular intervals? Like, how does communication work in your current setup?
Good question. When we moved into our last place, we kind of committed to like at least a monthly meeting. And then when there's things that need to be figured out, we try to make sure we all sat down and either shared a meal or talked through stuff. But we've also, in some of those meetings, we established that it felt very different, the housing situation we had now compared to what we did have before. And so some of those meetings kind of quickly melted away as we realized like, oh, we're actually talking to each other when something needs to be done. Sans of meeting, like, like this is, we don't necessarily need this structured interaction anymore to make sure that things happen or that conversations are had. So it was interesting. We kind of came into our new housing situation where it was us three, and not some of the other people that they had lived with or that we had lived with. And we kind of came in kind of nervous about it, of saying, we're going to sit down, we're going to have these meetings, we're going to have these chore lists, we're going to, try to uphold all this. And then I think naturally we kind of just found that that wasn't necessary for us, that we had a little bit more inherent trust for each other, I guess, and or similar, ironically, similar uncommunicated expectations about how the vibe should be. And so I think we just found that we didn't need to maintain those meetings as often. And then a lot of our conversations now come in passing, like, oh, hey, we're on the same space. We need to think about this at some point, or we need to talk about that, or, and it's like, oh yeah. Here's the thought, here's the response, and there's not a whole lot that goes into it. So it's kind of melded into a nice camaraderie that doesn't come with a lot of structure.
Okay. Nice.
Which has been a nice feeling. So
that is nice. That is nice. What is their take on you? What is their take on your sexuality? Is that something that they have questions about or have had questions about? Is it just whatever? The subtext being not only just you, but then the aforementioned 10 queer friends that come over and paint. And I know you guys hang out all the time. I'm sure they've gotten to meet them multiple times over the years, but like, but yeah, like what is do they get you? Do they get this whole side B world? Like what is their take from the outside looking in?
Two fun stories, and then I can maybe give you some literal data points.
Okay.
One, last year for Halloween, we came up with the grand idea. I think it was myself and some of the side B people down here, of like, let's have a gender bent Halloween. So every character has to be gender bent. Like, oh, you got to come as the opposite gender of whatever the character is. And when I tossed it to my roommates, there was some like pause and concern. They're like, well, I don't, they're like, oh, I don't want to dress up as a woman. I don't want to come to a Halloween party as a woman. And we quickly calmed their nerves. We said, hey, no. You don't have to dress up as a woman. You can dress up as your favorite woman character as a man. And then they got super excited.
Okay.
So,
Wow,
like one of my roommates came as Harley Quinn. The other one came as Corpse Bride from the old Tim Burton movie. Like we had a good time. Some of us came as, Helga from Atlantis, if you remember, or Helga, I think it's Helga. Some of us came as like Cruella de Vil, but man style. Some of us came as Mulan. It was a good time. Like people took the gender of their character, their person, they just twisted it, and it was kind of fun. So that was like one response that they're tentative about. They're like, we're not getting into drag for Halloween, and we're like,
that was my
first.
That was my first thought. So I was eager to hear about like a female Captain America, or I don't know, something else.
That could be fun.
Yeah, but okay.
And it would be amazing if I convinced all my straight friends to get into drag. But I don't think we're not there yet. So that's like the cap. We know that that's the cap. On the sort of like underside of that cap, I often joke with my roommates. They go to the gym regularly. They kind of do their thing. They're very like the bro-y thing that they're at the gym. They take the selfies of themselves. They track their progress. And so I'll often joke of like, well, why aren't you forwarding those photos to me? Like, obviously I have to have some sort of content for my sexual fantasies. I'll joke with them that they are that material. And of course they just blow me off. They don't give any credence to it. But, so we have that sort of banter. I mock them about that obviously they're nothing but, content for my sexual pleasure. And that's all I think of them as. And then we'll watch the Olympics, and I can joke about which guy teams look great and which bodies are amazing. And then they'll switch it over to women's beach volleyball and be like, yeah, this is what we
women's beach volleyball. How can you turn away from the men's gymnastics? We had this amazing
That's what I say.
Conversation on Discord.
I also call them out for objectifying the women. I can't believe them for doing that. Like that's so disgusting of them.
This guy, was his name Steven? Was his name Steven N? Is that the guy with the glasses?
Steven N. I don't know how to say his last name.
Steven something N. I think he has Polish. I think it's a Polish name, which I have Polish heritage as well. There we go, something like that. Yeah, he was all over my like literally for a straight week. He's all over my TikTok feed. This nerdy guy who does the pommel horse and twists, and he takes off his glasses and he just twists around and it's not just the beautiful male physique, because not only does he have one, but all of his teammates do as well. But then it was also just the camaraderie that they had with each other and how just they clearly enjoyed seeing each other succeed and being a part of a team. It was just a beautiful thing. And we talked all about that. But I could see how the straight guys would rather watch beach volleyball with the women. That's so funny.
Yeah, so that's kind of like the two stories to give their reaction to things. So they're comfortable joking about some of those things. In reality, probably one of my roommates would almost just be more affirming. Like he would probably say, oh yeah, Daniel, if you wanted to marry and love a man, that makes sense to me. Like, I don't see why you wouldn't do that. But he also does get the side B thing a little bit. He understands that it's like a commitment to faith and a religious belief. Like, he's got strong beliefs as well, in terms of his faith. And so he respects that. He just would also be perfectly fine if that wasn't the case for me. The other roommate comes from the more like niche religious communities that I like. I went to college in and taught in. And so part of me is, I'm like, I could probably talk to him more and get more out of him. He seems just comfortable and like willing to accept me. I think part of that is this like idea of, maybe he feels that I've shown him grace for things and he showed me grace for things. Like, maybe it's just part of that grace conversation. Maybe this is the thing you need grace for. I also need grace for things. So we're just going to be okay with stuff. Even I don't know where he actually lands on it as like a theological issue per se, but he's perfectly fine and comfortable with all the queer friends that come in and out and doesn't question that, oh yeah, we're just going to have like 5 queers over for a dinner and painting party, or that we're going to have a gender bender Halloween. As long as he doesn't have to get in drag, he's fine. So
right, that's really beautiful. Just to hear that perspective, because I know different people in our community will have different vantage points about either they just have never lived with a straight man and just don't know how that would work, or maybe they have and maybe things got awkward, or if things got awkward, maybe on the flip side, just it being more of just the only reason they're living together is just for lower rent, and there's no interaction or there's no relationship. It's just literally you have your bedroom, I have my bedroom. Occasionally we may intersect in the kitchen or bathroom somewhere, but otherwise it's like, we're just here to make life easier financially, and there's no relationship. And I know for a lot of gay queer men, like that can be very, especially for someone like me who is more relationally minded, I think like that would be very hard to just go into a situation where we're not intentional to interact and bond in any kind of capacity. And so it sounds like you've got a really, really good situation by and large.
Yeah. And we don't need to dive right into the deep end. We can round this out with other conversations. But to that point, I do think that this has been a journey to figure out part of the pots and pans story. And I had to cope with this and kind of come to terms with this, that part of the frustration that grew out of the pots and pans, I think underlying, if I can give them the best benefit of the doubt, some people would tell me like, no, you don't have to give them the benefit of the doubt. The person who caused my my pan and pots and pans exodus under my bed, but giving them the best benefit of the doubt, I actually think I went into that housing situation expecting them to fulfill like every sense of family and to meet that like expectation of, oh, you're going to be around, we're going to do things together, we're going to be happy, there's going to be peace, it's going to be more like my idyllic childhood. But I never told them that, and it also didn't happen naturally. And so then there was like that building resentment of, well, why don't you want to talk to me when I get back from work? Or why don't you want to do things with me? Or why don't you invite me to the activities you're doing? But I never said those things. And then that growing feeling of like, I thought we had said we'd be friends or family when we moved out, but I guess that those words meant different things to me than it did to them. Right? Like that word friend, that word family has different connotations. And I think I maybe had some very high idyllic images of what it would be without ever communicating that. And so then I probably, he might have broken my heart a little bit. So who knows? I'm not aware enough of my own attractions and feelings to know if that's entirely the case, but it's one of the narratives that makes sense. So,
Enneagram 9 life.
Part of that. Yeah. Right. Not knowing my needs and wants. So part of the joy and the comforts of this housing situation is both they have minimal expectations for me, but I've also realized like, oh, what if I don't see these 2 people I live with as my family? What if they are kind of like good acquaintances / friends who have been good housemates? And that's all they are right now. If I want there to be something more, it's going to take time and effort. So that's been helpful for me to enjoy living with them more.
Yeah, let's keep wading into the deep end here, because I think one of the questions that came up as I was pondering your situation and what I would think the listeners would want me to ask you is like, A, do you even want this? Like, do you want to live with them in an ideal world? Would you like to live with them for many years, whether that's 5 more years, 20 more years, 50 more years, whatever the number is? Is this something you would like to extend beyond just a year-long lease? Because I know you mentioned at the top you've just signed a year-long lease. So A, is that true? Is that something you want longer term? I guess B would be then like, is that just inevitably in your mind that at any moment Cupid could strike and one of these men could find a woman and away they go and off to a new chapter, and you're left to either find a new roommate or find a new situation altogether. Like, how do those two things enter your psyche these days?
Yeah. To that point, like one of them has expressed that they care to be married and or find a new housing situation in the future. There's not really a hard timeline on that. There's not a certainty about when or what that would look like, but we're aware, and I think that's helpful and good. I don't expect them to be around for the rest of my life. One of them, I think, is more likely to stick around for a while, and we'll just kind of see what comes of that. They did move at one point to a new job and for a girl to a different state, but then they end up coming back, and it's like, oh well, maybe they're comfortable staying here for a while. We'll kind of see. So I don't take it for granted that we have a good situation now, but that very well could change. There's also a number of yobbers out here, and we've talked about the plausibilities of other housing situations that are overlapping with each other, or things like that. But to your point about what do I envision, it makes me think of like the Bonhoeffer quote of like talking about him who cannot be alone, beware of community, and him who cannot be in community, beware of being alone. Have you heard this?
I have not, but I love it.
Oh, yeah. So I did Google it to see if I can get it right exactly. And he says, let him who is not in community beware of being alone. And at least for me growing up, I was very much removed from community. I joke about this all the time with people, but if you were to see me in middle school, high school, you'd probably be like, who's that person? Even in my class I graduated with 16 people. In my class of 16 people, when we got to my senior year, there were a number of people who are like, I didn't really know you before this year, but it's been nice to get to know you now. And it's like, you think in a group of 16, how could you not be known by someone? Our school was smaller than 100 people, K to 12. And in a group of 16, people didn't know me because I was more comfortable keeping separate because I didn't particularly like being with people, and I didn't particularly like people. So part of my housing situations and one of the joys I had in college was like finding that great joy in being with people. But it also came from a place of like, I don't know how to be alone, but I don't know how to be in community, and I don't know which, I'm still figuring all that out. So I think I've gotten better at being with people. And in that sense, I think I've also learned, I think I'm becoming more comfortable being alone. And I could see myself living alone in the future, but like right now, I still have difficulty kind of on both ends. I don't really love being in large groups of people, and I don't really love being alone. And so I feel like I'm not sure exactly what would change to say like, yeah, you could live by yourself, or maybe I'll be satisfied with my ability to find isolation and quiet, where I would continue living with people. I'm not sure. So
yeah, that's so funny because I had my graduating class was huge compared to yours because mine was 36. So I was one of 36, more than twice as big as your class.
Huge. But I can't even imagine.
It's so funny because I distinctly remember, I haven't opened up my yearbook in God knows how long, but I distinctly remember people writing in my yearbook, and I only got a yearbook my senior year. So it was like my last year of high school, I got a yearbook, and I remember people writing like, Tom, you really came out of your shell this year. Or I really like loved getting to hang out with you on the senior trip because I only went on one class trip in my whole life, and it was my senior year. And so senior year, there was something that happened where I just felt like it's time to like take a little more risks and step out a little bit. And not that I was a huge social butterfly by any stretch, but compared to what I was like in 6th grade, 7th grade, certainly. I've always hated we're talking about the Enneagram a lot, but I've always hated the Enneagram animal analogy because there's like all these animals that correlate with each of the types. I think the 9 is the elephant, and the 4, I've always hated the 4 because the 4 is the cat. And I was like, I do not want to be a cat. Cats are fine. I'm not like a big anti-cat person. I know people out there have some hot takes on cats. I don't necessarily hate cats as far as the animals themselves, but I hate being described as a cat, or I hate being seen as a cat, because cats are very choosy with when they want to hang out with people and when they want to do their own thing.
Yeah.
Some are outdoors and they'll go out and disappear for 3 days, and and they'll do their own thing, and then they'll come back to eat, and then they'll cuddle up next to you for an hour, and then they disappear again. And I hate that. I'm like, if I'm being truthful with myself, I feel like that there are plenty of times where I love socializing, I love being with people, and love the idea of sharing a space with somebody. But if I'm honest, more often than not, I prefer to have like my independent hunter instincts kicking in and just like go out and do
Mm-hmm.
my own thing and just like nobody
Yeah.
bother me and just let me do my own thing. And I'll choose when I socialize, not the other way around. And so I resonate with that because I see the beauty in sharing life with people in a living situation because we spend so much of our lives at home. But I also see there is a freedom that comes with, you know, your pots and pans are exactly where you've left them and your bathroom is as clean as you're going to make it or leave it. And there's just like, those are all little things that translate to bigger things down the road. But I think ultimately learning to be present, because you have no idea how long, you're going to be in that situation, and seasons are constantly changing. And I don't know. I hope you are able to enjoy this season, however long it lasts.
Yeah, I was amazed. I was out and about traveling this summer between Revoice and seeing family and seeing some friends and doing a little cabin trip with some queers, and it was amazing. I'd only lived in this house that I'm in now for I think like a total of 4 days. Before I was off house sitting somewhere, and then I was house sitting for someone else, and then I left for my trip. So I hadn't even finished unpacking my boxes in this house in my room. And I hadn't slept in this bed for more than 4 days, and then there I was, like in the middle of the Midwest in Missouri, thinking I can't wait to go home. And I was kind of laughing because I'm like, the thing I want to go home to is a room I've not lived in for more than 4 days. And I'm like, well, and that was right on the heels of this, this podcast series starting. I was like, how interesting! I've always hated when people ask me the last couple of years of working, like, well, are you going home for the holidays? And the implication is, are you going to this some proverbial like demarcated area where your family has existed always, and they're like they blossom from, and that like that's where your roots are, and that's where your clan is. But my family had always been all over the place. The place we landed, I resented for the longest time. Like my parents are still there, but they're not going to stay there. They're going to be moving here soon. So even that sense of like, well, your parents are there. Is that home for you? Kind of always. I like to be disruptive and say, no, that's not my home. Home is where I'm at right now. Like, this is my home. I love being here in California and the space I'm in and the people I'm with. Like, that's home. So
yeah, that question is trippy because especially the house that my parents are living in now is not a house I've ever lived in, and so there is not like that is a hard word to use to say that I'm going home. Like I would say I'm going to see my parents or I'm going to visit my parents. Yeah. Or just I'm going to Georgia, just to be very generic.
Yeah.
But using the word home is a loaded word. Like I really want home to the first thing I think of to be this place where I live, the city, the apartment, the four walls that I call, that I find every day. So before we get to the final parts of this episode, any other joys and challenges of where you live?
Yeah, I think I touched on most of the joys, like truly just the sort of relaxation that we have together, the low bar for entertainment. We enjoy our time together. I think another sort of addition to that joy that falls into kind of the background, like because we all have very distinct lives, part of my realization that like maybe they are friends, maybe they're tangentially like acquaintances, roommates, like somewhere in that weird space of I don't quite call them family, but I feel at home with them. And maybe in that sense they are family, but because we have our own lives, we have our own activities, we often end up being very precise in like, hey, we're doing this at this time. Do you want to be involved? So the fact that like if something's going to happen, it has to be communicated has helped me feel more at peace. Like, oh, I'm not going to be left out of something that I was supposed to be at, or oh, I'm not going to like they're not expecting me to be here for that game night that's happening that they didn't tell me about. If I'm invited to be there, it's going to be told to me, and I look forward to those opportunities because rather than just presuming, it's like I think college kind of has this mentality that things just happen, and if you're not there, you miss it, right? Like if you missed out on the thing that happened, then you just weren't there. You had to be there, which I do have a little bit of that FOMO from, the finding my place, finding my home. And so knowing that those things have to be communicated is kind of been restful for me. Part of that big move to away from Michigan, away from the idyllic, I think just revealed how much naivety, how little I knew about what was actually going on in family. And I noticed the shift when we moved that people didn't want the move in my family, whether that was the proverbial we or the literal we. I think there was sometimes that family members voiced that they didn't want to be at this new place. But I think it was the first time I had noticed that there was like dissonance with how our family was existing. It was like the first time I noticed that there was like hard feelings about choices that were made, but it also became abundantly clear that those hard feelings couldn't be communicated. And I think part of that like realization that I was maybe somewhat trained to believe that I can't say those things lest it becomes overwhelming for maybe the emotionally unavailable father or the emotionally anxious mother. Like those things, if I say that I don't want to be here, that I'm not happy we're moved, those could create bigger problems. So then I felt the need, or I learned the need to kind of hide those things. And so, yeah, I think I've been trying to splice out what it means to find that comfortable, idyllic space again of like, oh, I'm existing with people. We don't have any sense of needs or wants or frustrations or conflicts. My wants aren't disrupting our ability to interact. I think that sense of like family that I thought of when we were kids, me and my siblings kind of roaming, having adventures, became my sense of home, like people that I can be at home with, that I can sort of like let my hair down, if you will, to take the masks off. Like those were the spaces that kind of feel the most like home right now. When that like idyllic sense of family kind of is when it's manifested. So definitely still looking for that. Definitely still trying to find ways to experience that. A lot of failed attempts along the way, trying to find family in my work, at my church, in YOB. Like all of those things have kind of like, there's been sputterings and images of the kingdom, maybe like taste of those moments, but certainly a number of times that they just kind of flopped and realized like, oh, I can't find that idyllic sense in my experiences with other people. Like that probably is pointing to something that's maybe further into eternity than I care to admit. So
they're like teases. Like it's beautiful when we get those glimpses of home and those experiences with people in living situations or otherwise, but then it can also feel like a cruel tease from the Almighty where it's like, okay, you can get a little bit of kingdom life now, but it's not ideal. It's not realized yet, rather. And that's kind of the tension of, I think we can receive and we can also help create that here on this side of paradise, but it is going to feel incomplete. And it is a beautiful tension that is very frustrating sometimes. I'm curious to hear, just where you are in your faith journey and your journey with sexuality, your journey as a man. Like, how do you feel at home, or do you feel at home, or what level of at-homeness do you feel in those three arenas?
Yeah, I when I saw those questions, my immediate thought was like, oh yeah, I've always felt at home with my faith. But then I felt like I need to step back with that, because I think part of the realization is maybe I haven't always felt that my faith was at home in my religious settings. Maybe is a good way to put it. Part of my frustrations with people and sometimes systems is that where I can feel pretty comfortable about what I believe and what I feel and what I've learned that I think is real or true. Sometimes I don't always see that or feel it in the spaces around me. And then I can just quickly blame other people because it's easier than seeing fault in myself. So, but part of that maybe comes with maybe there are some religious settings and circles I surround myself in that it's not really the home for my faith. But I think currently I'm still at the place where my faith also tells me that wherever I'm at in whatever religious community and circle is also where I'm meant to be to kind of continue to be an active and engaged member. And that doesn't necessarily just mean being shallowly happy together, doing all the young adults things and all the community life things that my church is putting on, all the production that they're doing. It doesn't necessarily mean that. So I'm trying to find that balance of okay, I can feel at home in my faith and also not feel at home in my religious communities, but believe that I'm supposed to be there and make a difference in some ways. So trying to maintain those frustrations, realities, those tensions, I think is pretty biblical, like you said. So that's kind of where I'm at with faith. In terms of sexuality, I think I'm becoming more comfortable.
Sexuality. I say that all the time.
Sexuality.
I like to accentuate that. I wanted to say real quick too, before we get into sexuality with faith, I love that distinction you made of, I resonate with that a lot. I've always been comfortable as a Jesus follower. I can't think of a time in my life where I wasn't one. And it's not to say that I have this perfect relationship with Jesus, because I assuredly do not. But the struggle to find a faith community, that is part of faith. That is part of a rich, well-balanced life of following Jesus, is having other believers around you that you can minister to one another. Yeah. But that has definitely been lacking for many seasons of my life. And so there is a tension there, as feeling I feel at home as far as following Jesus, but then I also feel like I need a lot of support sometimes. And sometimes I have it, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I feel like I fit in, sometimes I feel like I don't. And sometimes that can create tension in my relationship with Jesus, because I'm like, well,
Mhm.
Lord of hosts, how am I supposed to do this life if you don't give me
Yeah,
the right
yeah.
people to help me do this life with? So there can be some frustration there. But I think ultimately, if I/you/we, if we can learn to be honest about our frustrations, I think that only lends to a
Mm.
deeper relationship with Jesus. You know, he is not going to be offended if we are frustrated with him or angry at him. I think he
Yeah.
welcomes those feelings of discomfort and tension. I think it's beautiful to see in scripture that he experienced loneliness, he experienced betrayal, and he experienced
Mhm.
a cut offness from the people around him. So that is nothing that he is unfamiliar with. So I just wanted to echo that from your faith perspective.
Yeah.
All right, sexuality.
Sexuality.
Go ahead.
Yeah, like I said, I think with all the hesitation and I'm sure qualifications I could come up with, I think I'm becoming more comfortable in my experience of sexuality. Like I've always, not, I shouldn't say always. I have found that I see some overlap between my experience of spirituality and sexuality, in the sense like that the way I feel that there is always a yearning and need for something other than myself spiritually. Like I felt pretty comfortable, like Jesus is the way, like that's the thing I believe and know, and it's reinforced with, like the truths of reality. I feel that same way towards people, where I'm like, as much as I may despise other people and also love other people, like some that need for others, like the need for the body of Christ in different ways is also a very real thing. I think it's just becoming like a space of knowing that sometimes my desire for like those others, in this beautiful place of sunny San Diego, can sometimes be much more a selfish need for fulfillment than it can be a sense of like, oh, this is the body of Christ. So, trying to find that comfortable side B space of like, yeah, sure, your mind, your body, your soul can see things that are good and necessary in the body and want that. But it also can see lack and emptiness in yourself and say, oh, they'll fill that. So, the joyful, tenuous space of side B, trying to splice those attractions and desires and say like, okay, there's good there. It might be tainted by some unfortunate, lustful or envious or, self-gratifying thoughts. But maybe there's space to believe that there's good there too, and that I do need the body. I do need the body of Christ.
Yeah.
Not just the body of beautiful San Diego men, but the body of Christ.
Which we will not go into story time because we've run out of time. But like, you guys did take me to a nude beach technically.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's one of the features of the San Diego tourist excursion. If you call our landlines and reserve your slots for hospitality and transportation.
I will clarify. We were fully clothed and we were far enough away from the nude bodies, but may have caught a glimpse or two of some things. I will just say that as we return to our vehicles. But no, I feel that there's a tension there of like, we are all humans and we all have needs. And so there's a line between selfishness and just what, like, we all need food and water and human bodies in our lives. So like, where is the line between self-gratifying or
self-sacrificial, I think.
Yeah, self-sacrificial too. So there is a tension there between those two extremes.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that actually ties into my sense of masculinity, I would say. I used to think that like my sense of masculinity had to be like this sort of difference of ideas and interests, and like I liked the arts and I liked this and I like that. But the more I thought about it, like I think it always has been centered around my experience in my body, which we talked about last time. So I think it makes sense to kind of point back to that. Like, although I used to think it was kind of up in my head, I think that was just my mind making sense of the difference that I perceived in the bodies of the boys and the men around me growing up. Like I think in the ways that I saw their bodies being more masculine in some sense, I found ways to cope with that by saying, okay, well, I just need to become more like that, or that's the thing that would make me masculine. If I can be the more jock stereotype, or if I could do that with my body, if I could be, physically active in that way, then that would be my at homeness, the thing that would make me feel masculine. And so like I still wrestle with that. I think like we talked about that with last time. Like I don't want to become a workout guru that like just shapes my body to perfection, and then I get some sense of like, yes, now I'm masculine. And so I have a tendency towards like, well, I'm just going to rebel against that idea and not do anything, and force myself to overcome the sense of my body doesn't actually control how I feel about my masculinity, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So yeah, as of right now, I think the last year has been semi more stressful in some ways than others. And I tend to like eat and drink my feelings. So, there's like useless carbs that go into that and that don't necessarily go away if you don't work out. And so then like, maybe I've gained weight this season, and maybe I experience my body differently. And maybe that makes me feel less of a man. And maybe it also prompts me to feel like, oh, there's more people out there who have more of that masculine body. And then that sparks other parts of my faith and sexuality that makes me conflicted. But I think part of it is just finding a sense of like, oh no, my experience in my body as a man makes me masculine. And appreciated what you said on your blog recently about like showing up again and again, right? Like being in reference to your biking of just being present, to show up and be courageous in that sense is being masculine. I resonate with that too. So
shout out to Tom's blog. All right. I'll put a link to that, but I'll also put a link to your previous podcast about body image, because I think that's a great conversation I enjoyed with you. I always love it when we get to talk. I feel like masculinity is the thing. Hot take. Here we go. Masculinity is the thing I would love to talk about probably 80 to 90% of the time, but I recognize that probably, and this is just me making up numbers out of my head, probably 80% of our audience would prefer we talk more about sexuality more of the time. And so I have to find the medium of like, I love talking about things like body image and puberty and emotional intimacy and relationship building and a lot of stuff like that. And there's overlap with sexuality for sure. But what does it mean to be a man? If you can just boil it down to what does it mean to be a man? And in that biking blog that you referenced, like I have this tendency to sign up for big things, big flashy things, whether it's bike races or men's retreats or men's excursions or things that I feel like I don't have here. I need to go somewhere else to get that thing, that shiny orb of masculinity, whatever it looks like. And then when I come back with it, then I will be more of a man. And that's like a very simplistic way of putting it. But I think that's subconsciously what's going on in my head. A lot of times that's how I perceive of masculinity. But what I'm learning is that, masculinity, life in general is not lived in those mountaintops and those excursions and those big things that we sign up for. Like it's Monday mornings, it's Tuesday mornings, it's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday mornings. Like it's every single day. And how are you going to show up today? Are you going to show up today? Are you just going to phone it in and not show up today? And Lord knows there have been many days where I have not shown up, but I think that I'd like to think anyway, that's something I'm doing a better job at. I'm feeling like I'm getting more efficient at, which is like, it's time to show up today. Maybe today I have 10% less of myself to bring than I did yesterday, but that's okay. Like I can bring 100% of what I have today, which may not be as much as I had yesterday or 2 weeks ago before I broke a collarbone or what have you. Like there's all kinds of things that interrupt our lives and take away from our lives or our sense of masculinity. And I think just showing up, whatever context that is, relationally, physically, mentally, like just to be able to be able to do that on a daily basis, look back on our day. And if I showed up, then that's me being masculine, and same for you as well.
Well, shout out to book club if I can.
Yes, please shout out book club. What you got?
I'm not going to get 3 references like Matt did. My goodness. He really did his homework to bring in all the references.
He was ready.
And then I feel even more guilty because it's a reference to a book I couldn't show up to the book club for. But I think it was my favorite one from the year, Daniel Black's Don't Cry for Me.
Oh, please share because you weren't there. Yeah. What do you got from that book?
So good. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, here's the hot tidbits I didn't share at book club. I guess it's a special insights. I loved how much that story, which context, strings finders right there. It's written by a gay son pretending to be his straight father, writing letters to his son as he's kind of passing away, as he's like getting towards the end of his life. So this father is experiencing like the slow decay of his body and his sense of, I would say his sense of masculinity. Like as he's trying to tell his gay son all the things that he had learned as a child that were like what made him a man and that he tried to pass on to his son, and his son didn't understand. So like you get this weird sort of passing of the childhood father telling of like, this is what I learned it meant to be a man, as he's also writing this narrative that he's like decaying and losing his body, and all the things that he felt like made him a man are passing away. And you see him come to terms with like, I didn't understand you, son, but I love you. And like, I tried to connect with you. I tried to pass on masculinity, but I think I also just as much learned things from you. And it was like one of my favorites. I wish I could have been there to hear all your other thoughts.
You summed that up so well.
Oh, thank you.
Daniel Black's book, we'll put that in the notes as well.
Yeah, all the ideas we build up around masculinity changes with times and cultures, and then you realize like those things can be stripped and pulled away. So to your point, like maybe masculinity is just showing up as you are, and maybe that's enough. By God's grace, it's enough.
By God's grace, yeah. Aging, that's another matter because I've put a lot of time and effort into my body just by going to the gym and feeling more comfortable or feeling like I belong there, even though I still inherently feel like I don't. But at the end of the day, 50 years from now, I mean, maybe my body will still be in great shape. We shall see. But if that's what I'm putting all my chips into my body, like you're right. At some point, inevitably, there is decay happening. I mean, it's happening now. I just don't see it. But like, certainly 50 years from now, there will be some level of decay. And if that's all masculinity is like achieving some well-oiled machine of a body, there's going to be some comeuppance at some point, decades down the road, maybe much sooner. But yeah, I don't know. The showing up thing is something that I'm latching onto. So I'm glad we got to tie a nice little bow on this conversation by shouting out book club and reminding everyone about their mortality. This is a great Enneagram 4 note to end on. Let's remind people we are all decaying. Thank you.
Memento mori. Yeah. Remember you die. Right.
Yeah.
I've truly learned that home is not a physical space. It's more of a state of being, and sometimes that's the people you're with, and sometimes that's how you find yourself. Like you can be at home with people wherever. You can find family wherever. Sometimes it's just a glimpse, like we talked about, a glimpse of something more important to come. But I've enjoyed finding those moments and trying to cultivate them more often. So look forward to hearing about other people's experience of cultivating that sense of home. And thank you, Tom, for making this happen.
Yeah. Well, thank you for originating this concept, Daniel.
The originator.
New name. If I'm the Pope, you're the originator. So let's get some names established. I love nicknames. If you guys want to share your story of living with straight men, I want to hear some juicy straight men stories. So go over to our podcast episode page, yourotherbrothers.com/podcast, find Daniel's ConvoCast about living with straight men and tell us some stories. Because I imagine there's a spectrum there. People, with miffed expectations, or I don't know. I'm using my imagination of all the different types of scenarios that could exist between a straight man and a not straight man living together, or multiples of those combinations. So tell us some stories about what's been hard, what's been good, what's been joyous, what's been not so joyous, and let's all learn from one another, because I always enjoy getting to learn from one another and get all these puzzle pieces of home together in this series. I'm quite enjoying it. Thank you again, Daniel, for taking some time. I know I've taken an hour of your time that you could have been outside in the sunshine.
Well, I'll be back into the sun for probably like 10 hours tomorrow evening. So thank you, Tom. This was a nice break from the sun.
So maybe you needed some indoors time. Thank you for sharing some of your stories. Thank you for obliging me of the pots and pans story. I feel like I can die now that I know that story.
Yeah. I hope that wasn't the penultimate moment of your life, but I'm glad I could share. Thanks, Andrew, for dragging that drama out of my lips again.
One of the penultimate stories, not necessarily of my life, but of my podcast life, I will say. Like, I don't know. I don't get teased too often on the podcast about a story that will be told later down the road. So that was exciting. Well, we'll continue on next time with some more homie stories from our homies. That's a fun thing. I should start calling us our homies during this series. That would be fun.
Oh, yeah.
Teaser for next time when I call us homies. Stay tuned. Well, Daniel, I hope you'll be back. It's always good to talk with you.
Yes. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Tom.
Be a pleasure at the retreat, too, in a few months. Another little glimpse of home. I always enjoy those opportunities to get our brothers all together from all corners.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here, brother. And y'all, until we gather at home once again.
When I'm with you, I feel like I'm already home.
Did you know what a flock of sparrows is called? I found this out.
I have no idea. No,
recently.
What is a flock of sparrows called? I've never looked it up. It's not just a flock?
So there's two words. No, it's there's two words. It's either a host, which is fine, or an ubiquitous, ubiquity of sparrows.
Way. Are you serious?
Yeah, no,
A
I'm
ubiquity?
serious. I looked this up. A ubiquity.
No way.
I was so excited when I saw that because I was like, what does that even mean? That's like that they all like belong together. They're all in the same in some ways. They all like have a shared
We
experience.
need to do
So,
something with that.
the ubiquities of
Yeah.
sparrows.
I'm so glad I don't know how in the world I've gone 9 years of running YOB without knowing what a flock of sparrows is called. So that is crazy to me.
Even the ubiquity of the sparrow.
We will
find a home.
rest assured, listeners, we will find a way to work in ubiquity somewhere. In some context, you will see ubiquity pop up now. Daniel, you'll be the originator of that as well. So keep originating. We love it when you originate. So please keep doing that.
Oh, good. Thank you.